Meow 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 meow. Deconverted man here. Ah yes. Let's cover some simple logic, shall we? Alright. A equals A. The law of identity. A is either true or A is false. That's the law of excluded middle. A cannot equal not A. That's the law of non-contradiction. These three laws are referred to as the laws of logic. You don't have to do the echo every time. So, do these ideas exist just in the mind? Or do they exist in the universe and the mind? Or one or the other? Or do they exist in whatever the true nature of reality is? Or do they exist in both the mind, the universe, and the true nature of reality, whatever that is? Or something else? And or? That's a good question. And philosophers have different ideas, but they're all wrong and I am right. Okay. So, yes, the laws of logic exist in our mind. And of course, mind is just a supplement for brain. Yeah, it's a different way of saying brain because some brains don't have what we would call minds, like animal brains uh, don't have the same sort of mind as we do. As far as we know, they cannot conceptualize these sort of complex ideas. Therefore, they might have a mind, but it's not the same kind of mind. So when you see the word mind, it usually is talking about the sort of mind that we have. And as far as we know and as have observed thus far, all minds require a brain. So if you don't have a brain, you probably don't have a mind. But of course, certain apologetics likes to play fast and loose with the word mind and abstract it into not needing a brain. And what about the universe? Well, of course, the mind or brains exist in the universe, so anything in there is going to also exist in the universe. But, well, at some point, there wasn't a us, but there still was a universe. So, did the laws of logic still exist? Well, yes, comma. And the comma is that, well, they exist, but there's no one there to name them. There's no one there to have the idea of them. There's no one there to label them. So they still are, though, because the laws are reflective of the reality itself, the as close as we can get the true nature of reality, which is itself somewhat unknown, perhaps unknowable. You know, the universe is in reality. What that is, what that means, well, that's beyond the scope of this. But the laws of logic are still there. They have to be. They can't not be. Uh, you have to have at least one rule. And that would at least be, at the very least, that you can't have paradox, which would be the law of non-contradiction. A cannot be not A. And why? Well, because if paradox is allowed, then, well, the true nature of reality becomes absurd. And well, you might say, well, so what? Well, so what is that absurdity breaks down? The universe or the reality can exist and not exist at the same time, and well, can't have reality winking out of existence and then winking into existence. If reality isn't there, then there isn't anything at all. The true state of absolute nothingness that the apologists might mention every now and again that nothing can come from. It's like, yeah, well, if you had absolutely nothing, well, but then you would have at least one rule. So you have to have this rule. You have to have the rule of non-contradiction, if nothing else. Because if you posit a reality that allows for paradox, reality can exist and not exist, and then do anything else that it wants or doesn't want, and it just leads to random absurdities. So usually, what happens with certain apologetics is they will say something like the laws of logic depend upon the mind, but they can't be dependent upon the human mind. So, and they can't be dependent on the universe, so they have to be dependent on a transcendent mind, and that mind is God. The well, the problem is that God itself is also subject to the laws of logic. A equals A. Uh, so God is God. That would be the law of identity. God cannot be not God. So that's the law of excluded uh, middle. And God is either God or it's not God, or it isn't. And so therefore, yeah, that's the law of non-contradiction. So God itself also is subject to the laws of logic. Well, the clever person might say, fine, the nature of God is that it contains the nature of logic itself, which at that point you don't need God. You can just have nature also doing the same function. You don't need to posit God uh, to say that the nature of the true reality, which you're saying is God, you could just say that the true nature of reality is that the laws of logic are in reality, no matter what, whether there's a God or not. The laws of logic have to be. That's just how it is. That's just how it be. There is not uh, a reality that could exist or would exist that allows for paradox. So no paradox, no P allowed. P A E X. No paradoxes allowed. That's your number one uh, rule, and it's really the only rule that you absolutely have to have. But you can't not have that. So even God, if it exists, has to have that rule of no paradox. And whether if you say, well, it's just God's nature, well, it's just the nature of reality. Now, of course, some will say, now rules require rule givers, and that's just dumb because they're then equivocating the word rule uh, or law. They'll say law requires a lawgiver, and again, it's an equivocation because the word rule or law is just saying the way that we observe the universe to be, or the way that we observe reality to be. And so if they're saying, well, that requires a God, well, then they're begging the question. They're asserting that the rule or the law can only exist if a God exists. And so there you go. That's presuppositionalism. It's circular. Didn't prove God. So whether God exists or not, the laws of logic exist uh, in such a way that even God is subject to them. So you simply don't need to posit God to have those laws. Nor do you need a brain to have those laws to be true. And so, again, the philosopher might say, oh, this is transcendent because it's outside of minds. No, it's just the way that reality behaves. That doesn't mean anything more than that's just how reality be. Now, the rest of the now, okay, so we know something about the true nature of reality. Mainly, we know at least that paradox is impossible. Uh, Maybe these other ones are questionable. Maybe we could say the law of identity. There might be some problems with that. Uh, but yeah, maybe the law of excluded middle. Maybe you could have some wiggle room there. But this one for sure, you have to have that one. You can't not have that one. That one is absolutely A plus. You have to have it. You can't not have it. Now, why I say that, there are some non-classical logics that try to argue with the law of identity, but they do so by playing with what this law is. A law of excluded middle isn't really played with that much, but I do see that there could be, some non-classical logic that could perhaps play with it. But usually it's messing with natural language and messing with the terminology of what middle means or what excluded means or what the words mean. It's like, what do you mean by the non-contradiction? Define that word. Well, define that word without using a word. Okay, that's not possible. So there you go. Simple. I've explained reality. At least that part of it. Hope you all were taking notes. Oh, we got some chat here. Okay. What explains the things the way they are as opposed to other ways? What is responsible for that? That's a good question. Of course, it assumes there is something that explains that. And I submit for your approval or disapproval that the laws of logic are axiomatic. They can't not be. They have to be. Now, of course, some apologists will say that for God has to exist. It can't not exist. It's a brute force reality. It's an axiomatic thing. Okay, well then, God's a law of the universe, a law of reality. You really want to make God into that? Because there's potential problems with that. It makes God very not needed in many senses, because you don't need the God to explain the other laws. You're just asserting that God is a requirement. A requirement for what? So the laws of logic are requirements that we find to be true. Find it to be true that paradox is impossible. Well, why? Well, because if it was possible, then it would lead to absurdities. Well, who cares? Maybe that's the case. Well, but if it was the case, then absurdities would be true, and they're not. Well, how do we know that? Well, okay. It's kind of an axiomatic sort of claim. Could they be a different way? Well, maybe, possibly, probably, no. These things, as far as we understand, it couldn't be different. That the paradox thing could be possible. There doesn't seem to be any flexibility there. It seems to me that paradox has to be impossible, and the reason is because if it wasn't that way, then nothing would follow. You can't follow a logical reality of any sort with the logical premise that paradoxes are true. Everyone else says hello. Okay, so why is God's nature one way as opposed to any other way? What explains that? Right, so if God's nature is identical to the nature of reality itself, well, again, you don't need God to explain it because you just have reality. So I think God is an unnecessary step. Now, of course, God could still exist separately from that. And why would it be that way? Because it has to be. You could say that, you could assert that, and some people do. Well, okay, but where's your formula? I mean, we can say A equals A, God equals God. Okay, we could try to define it into being. But when we already have other terms, why would we bother? We already have terms for the law of identity. Why would we bother having God equals God? It's the same thing. So it'd be kind of a superlative thing. If a specifically defined God results in a paradox, it would negate the existence of said God. Yes, exactly. Any and all gods that are paradoxical in nature couldn't exist. God can't make a rock so heavy it can't lift, which means no God can truly be omnipotent. They can only be logically potent. So the word omnipotent probably should be discarded for theology, but they really like it, so yeah, the laws of logic are basically the same. Yeah, they're restating the same sort of fundamental truth, and yeah, and if paradoxes were possible, we're result in world thing, letting anything goes, well, it doesn't, right? It would lead to absurdities, and so you have to have that rule. You can't not have that rule. Very simple logic. Um, the laws of logic being metaphysical or transcendent, or requiring a mind. If you hear that in apologetics, uh, try to let your little skeptical antenna rise and be like, what do you mean by metaphysical? What do you mean by transcendent? What do you mean that they require a mind? Uh, what are you saying there? What exactly is it that you're trying to explain with that? And what couldn't you do with that explanation that you could or couldn't do without the explanation? So if it's an axiomatic sort of idea like God has to be, it's like, okay, well, that's an interesting, sure, let's take that where it goes. Okay, well, so God can't not be, right? Well, then the laws of logic can't not be. Okay, so why do we need God again? Well, because. Well, but why? Just because you said so? Well, why did you see? You can justify the laws of logic having to be. Can you justify the God having to be? If you can, well, that'd be interesting. I haven't seen that argument, but I know people try to do it. Yeah, the God of the Kalam is paradoxical. Well, the God of the Judeo-Christian God, depending on the theology, is extraordinarily paradoxical in nature, of all degrees, because you have a all-loving and all merciful and a judge. So you can't have both all mercy and be a judge, because then you would just judge everything as being innocent. At which point you're not judging anything really if you're just rubber stamping everything. So there's other, and of course I would say that the Judeo-Christian God is not a being of logic, and I would propose that a true God, although you could argue with this, a true God would have to be a God that is all logical all the time. So a true God could never make an illogical assertment, could never make an illogical argument. So if God is rewarding people for their belief and punishing them for disbelief, then that's an appeal to bribe and a ad ballum. So there's two logical fallacies that a perfect being that has perfect logic could not make. And of course, you negate the hell part, which is the punishment. Just say, well, the reward is there. Okay, well, then you have a God that rewards as bribery. You say, well, everybody is saved no matter what. Well, okay, that's interesting. It's not really supported by the Bible, but okay, whatever. Universalism doesn't really have that particular logical problem. The supernatural doesn't follow any rules, hence the square circle of supernatural. Yeah, the supernatural isn't even defined at all. So the supernatural kind of goes outside of the laws of logic in many ways, and might require some MS Paint here to try to explain. Although I've done so in other videos, it's always worth a relook. Sure, why not? We'll go wherever this takes us, or I'll go wherever this takes me until I don't feel like it anymore. So what's the supernatural, right? That's the $1 million question, if you will. You'll note that usually it's defined by what it isn't. So it's not anything that's natural. So whatever natural is, it is the opposite of that. Well, that doesn't really tell us what it is. It just tells us what it's not. That's kind of a problem. We could look up the term supernatural, and hopefully we don't get the stupid TV show. Okay, so the manifestation of event attributed to some force beyond scientific understanding or the laws of nature. So we'll go with that. That's pretty good. Okay. So woo, that's a bit big there. Let's not make it that big here. There we go. No, that's still too big. That's what she said. Let's see. Can we get it small enough to see? That's an interesting little statement. Okay, so beyond scientific understanding, let's take that one in isolation, first of all. Okay. So let's just say let's get rid of my little drawings for now. Yes, let's do that. Okay, so some force beyond scientific understanding. So today, we understand, that pi is, 3.14 whatever. I don't know the rest. It's too lazy to memorize the rest. Okay, but we say, well, how did life begin, or abiogenesis? Abiogenesis. We understand some of it, but not all of it. So that's beyond scientific understanding, at least today. Now, tomorrow, maybe we'll understand it, but today we don't. Okay. So if you saw, you had a little beaker, and, it's got, I don't know, it's got life in it somehow. You left it there alone, and you come back the next day, and it's different. Uh-oh. What happened? Oh, I don't know. It's beyond my understanding. I don't know what's going on. So it must be then supernatural, right? Because it's beyond our scientific understanding. Well, what are we really saying there, though? We're saying that I don't understand it. Well, what's another terminology for that? Well, there's actually a logical fallacy. Let's see. Incredulity. Alright, had to get it typed up correctly. Come here, type up. So, I don't know. I don't understand. I can't, I just don't understand how this happened. I don't know what happened here. And in fact, no human knows, what happened here. We do not understand how this is going back and forth between these colors. We don't know what's going on. So therefore, because we don't know what's going on, it must be this other thing. So we're using a logical fallacy. Now there's also the appeal to ignorance, which is similar in nature, where you can assert that a proposition is true because it hasn't been false yet. Or you can say, well, I don't know, therefore God, There's a number of ways to frame that, but so it has to be supernatural, because what else could it be? We don't understand it today, so it can't. It's got to be supernatural. It's so you're using two logical fallacies to get to that it's beyond scientific understanding. And how would you know that is beyond scientific understanding? Did you consult every single scientist on the planet? Well, let's pretend you did. That's a Herculean task, but let's just say we did somehow. And nobody knew what it was. Does that then make it supernatural? Well, under the definition, it would have to. Of course, to get there, we had to use logical fallacies. Isn't that a problem? I think it is. Maybe you don't, but okay. Or the laws of nature. Well, what's that? Well, how do we know all the laws of nature? Do we know every single law of nature? If not, then all we're doing is appeal to ignorance again, or appeal to personal incredulity. One of those fallacies. So if we're saying it's not that, it's not the laws of nature, how in the hell we know that? Well, I can't think of a different explanation. So it's got to be supernatural. I don't understand it, so it's got to be supernatural. So at what point, if anything that somebody doesn't understand is now supernatural, that's a problem, because you've made the supernatural into something that only exists due to ignorance or personal incredulity. So you've based it upon at one or two logical fallacies, possibly both. Oops. Then you also got the problem that you could sort of make an argument for, although you want to be careful because you don't want to do an appeal to definition. So, magic. Okay? The power or apparently influence the course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. Uh-oh. Magic uses supernatural. Right? So, what's magic? How would I know what magic is? So, we have a door, and we're familiar with doors. We're familiar with how doors work, broadly speaking. We've experienced doors. We know about doors. We're not door experts. I can't tell you everything about a door. But I'm fairly I'm fairly well versed in the operation of doors. So we have a door, and we have a nice wall here of some sort, that the door is going to be attached to, and we're going to have another nice little pretty wall over here, and we're just going to make those. I don't know. Let's have them be orange walls. Oh, that's terrible. I don't like that color. If they're brown, then they match the door. Let's have them be gray. Now that matches the knob. I don't know. Green walls. Okay, that's fine. That's good enough. Okay. And so what happens is the door on its own just opens. It opens up. Oops. Let's see if we can open it in any way that makes sense. Okay, well, it's like, we realized that making it look open was something we couldn't do in 2D. But whatever, it's open. Okay, it opened. And now normally you would expect, well, you'd expect something to open it. Maybe a person, that is badly drawn, because whatever. They opened it. Haha! I opened it. But what if there's no one there? Okay, well, maybe it was a cat. Or cats might open the door. Now, maybe it wasn't a cat. Maybe it was, of course, you know what I'm gonna put. Come on. Before I even finish what this is gonna be. Come on. Alright, yeah, we know. Lobster. Maybe it was a lobster. Lobsters can open doors, right? But we don't see any of that. We don't see any cats or people or lobsters. It's just nothing is there. There's just nothing. Okay. Well, okay, we look into that room. What's in that room, And maybe the wind blew it open, but there's no windows in that room. There's no windows. What about another door? Maybe that door was open and the wind blew through that. Nope. Maybe there's ventilation. No, there's no ventilation. It's a completely isolated room from everything else. It's a storage closet of some sort. All right. Well, okay. All right. We're clever beings. We're pretty clever. We can work this out. Something opened the door. Wasn't the lobster? What was it? Well, maybe the hinges are to blame. Maybe the locking mechanism was flawed. Maybe something happened. The little hole in the wall was damaged or whatever. And so let's pretend that we investigate all of these possibilities that come to mind, and we exhaust all the ones that we can think of until we just don't know what else we could possibly investigate. What we do know is the door opened. We don't know how that happened. Well, did it break the laws of nature? Well, no, it opened. That didn't break any laws of nature. But it opened on its own, which is an unexpected event. Especially it only happens that one time and never again. And sadly, you didn't record the event on your phone because you just didn't think to do it. So nobody's going to believe you, right? Well, what do? Either it's supernatural, by the definition of supernatural, or it's magic, by the definition of magic. So we can't separate magic and supernatural from each other. Uh-oh. And what are we relying on to declare that it is supernatural or magic? We're relying on our ignorance. I don't know. I've run out of answers. That doesn't mean it could have just been the one thing that you didn't think of. Like there was a hole in the door and you just didn't think about that there could be a hole in the door for whatever reason. But that's what the true cause was. You just didn't think of it in that moment. Maybe it was all a dream. Maybe it was a false memory. Maybe, who knows? How in the world do we know if it's supernatural or magic? The answer would be you couldn't ever know, because the whole thing relies upon your ignorance of the nature of what is happening. So I did a video called even if the supernatural is true. Well, I forget what it's called, but it's something about that. Let me find it. Let's see. Supernatural, and there's that one. Is real. Supernaturalism. Let's see. Even if bleep me. Well, whatever. It's there somewhere. Yeah, you can find it. Oh, there it is. Miracles. I didn't call it supernatural. That's why I couldn't find it. I called it something else. Okay. Miracles, even if they exist, they can't be identified as such. So that video pretty much says everything that I said here, just in a different way. Alright. So that's that whole problem. Alright. Let's see. Oh dear. I missed stuff while I was drawing. Yeah. Well, yeah. I thought we came up with that at the same time, though. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, well, it would, yeah, right. Well, you're talking about omnipotence versus omnilogicalness, or onlogicalness. True omnipotence is impossible, I would submit, because it would incur paradoxes. But the thing is, theology isn't about logic, it's about tradition, among other things. And traditionally, God is benevolent, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. And that omnipotent is where many have objected to this, and said, no. God lift a rock make a rock so heavy it can't lift, which is a paradox. Can God do something that it can't do? Well, if it can, then it can't. If it can make a rock that's so heavy that it cannot lift, it's a paradox. So then it can't do that. So then it can't do anything. It can only do things that are logically possible. And some have tried to salvage that by saying, well, no, that's what the word omnipotent always has meant. Is it always has meant? Of course it means only logical possible. Well, that's not the way it's worded, though. Let's see. Can I be at two places at once? No, but God can. Yeah. Well, God is every place at the same time. supposedly. Well, it depends on which god, but yeah, does that make sense? No, not. I mean, it's everywhere at once. Well, space is everywhere at once, or energy is everywhere at once. Although maybe there are places where there's no energy. Possibly, I don't know. There's just space, but what's space? So certainly some things can be everywhere at once, but can those things be aware that they're everywhere at once? I don't, I don't know how that would work. So, let's see. Let's see. What else? Did I miss anything that I want to comment on? Let's see. Omni's a god, only applies sometimes. It's a rule, so it's not really a rule. Yeah, like I said, the Omnis are at least the Omni potent one is definitely wrong in some way, shape, or form. Let's see. Okay. Does the supernatural have any rules? That's a good question to ask the person that believes in the supernatural. Uh, that's kind of, yeah. The laws of the supernatural realm would have to have some laws, wouldn't it? How does it operate? How does it work? I ask theists this now and again. How does God's power work? Where does that come from? Because we're used to power needing something. Humans consume to gain power. The sun consumes, everything consumes to have power, work, ability to do something. So what's God doing to do that? Does God have a perpetual motion machine inside of it that keeps it going? There's no answer for that. Well, why? Well, because theology never really sat down to try to figure out how God works in that way. At least the ones that we're aware of today. I, I, I don't know of all the theologies, so there could be one out there that tries to explain how God works. But the Judeo-Christian God is mostly shrouded in a lot of mystery. So, what's God made out of? Well, God's made out of God. Well, that's not an answer. God's not made out of anything. Okay, well, how does that work? You can't get an answer for something like that. God's made of spirit or soul. Well, what's that? What is that? It's a mind. Okay, what's a mind then? And there's questions that they cannot answer. The Bible doesn't have any clear answer, so they'd have to pull it out of their end, and usually they refuse to answer at all. Yeah, God being everywhere at once and also being a creator would be a paradox. Uh, yeah, what made God? Yeah, exactly. That's a good question to ask the theists. Why can't God be a different way? They could just say it's axiomatic. God's is power, social power. Yeah, essentially, the idea of God is used as a weaponized law, and that's what helped our species to get to where it is today to some degree, because before you had, laws of the land, people were largely governed by their fear of God doing something to them if they did something bad. Let's see if I can find that thing. Let's see. There we go. Okay. All right. Here's that. I think I could probably show it. I've showed this before. It's worth rewatching. This is a Princess Alice's watching you experiment. This has been done many times. Morgan Freeman here is narrating it, so let's just skip past all that to get to the experiment itself.
Are you guys ready to play a game? Jesse devised an experiment to test his theory.
All right, why don't you guys make a circle and sit in front of me here, and I'll go over the rules for you. So you see this piece of tape? The first rule is that you can't step over the line. The second rule is that you've got to throw with your back to the dartboard. So you can kind of go like this and do the best that you can. Oh, see? Oh, not that easy, is it? You're going to be playing this game one at a time, and the person that gets the most points on the dartboard gets a very special prize at the end of the day.
Okay, so it's a very straightforward game. You have to play by these rules, and you're playing alone, which is important. And you'll get the reward. What's the reward? He doesn't say what the reward is. It's very special, though. So the vagueness of the reward is, I would think, part of the experiment, too. I wonder if you would change your behavior depending on how you worded that particular thing. I've seen it. Yeah, they cheat when no one's looking. Right. Well, yes, they do. But just...
All right, we'll see you guys in a little bit.
There's more to it than just this is kind
Jesse watches through hidden cameras to see if the children cheat.
So here we've got a little boy, and you can
of course
see
they're gonna cheat.
the
Why wouldn't
machinations in
you?
his mind.
He's like, well, nobody
does it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You cannot really blame a 6-year-old for doing that. He really wants the prize. He thinks he can get away with it, and it's the normal child response.
Right, and I would dare say adult response as well. I mean, if you think you can get away with it, you might cheat, especially if you think the reward is worthwhile. You know, if you think, oh, I'm gonna get away with it. Now, not everybody does. Not everybody does, but you know, I'd love to see something like this done on adults. But okay. Now, he does this with all of them. They all, most of them cheat. Some of them don't, but most of them do. Okay, then they have a different group. And they, let them play around, then they do the same thing. But there's the
Have any of you ever heard of Princess Alice before? She's a very friendly, magical princess, and she's got a very special ability. She can make herself invisible. Princess Alice is sitting in that chair right now. So you guys go upstairs for now, and then we're going to bring you each down individually to play the game.
Okay, so now we've added God, basically. Princess Alice is invisible, and she is, well, she's a princess, so she has power, and she's watching you. She's watching you. So the behavior of these kids, does it change from the first kids? Yes, absolutely. Almost all of them now they'll go and look at the chair, they'll examine the chair, but they tend to not cheat at the game now. Why? Because Princess Alice is watching them. So they don't want to cheat anymore. That's God. That's what God's role was for a long time in history, was to keep humans behaving. And even today it works. Every now and then you'll hear an apologist or a preacher or somebody say, if I knew there wasn't a God, I'd go out and kill a bunch of people, or I'd do something terrible. And they probably actually mean it. They actually do mean that if they realized there wasn't a God, that's the only thing holding them back from being an evil, vile, despicable human being. Which is kind of a scary thought. And that's kind of weird too, because it's a self-reinforcing way to keep the belief intact. If you tell yourself, I can't stop believing this, or else I'm going to do terrible, horrible things, it's a pretty good reason to think that you should keep believing that. So they mean it. They actually do mean it, that they do believe that that's what they would do. They wouldn't hopefully, but it's a good mental trap. Okay. What else? Yeah, it doesn't. It's not in our universe, right? Yeah, the problem with putting Yahweh. Uh, many apologists have said Yahweh is beyond space time, which puts it nowhere and no when. As far as we know, Yahweh, any god that existed would have to have its own dimension, its own realm. It has to be somewhere. You can call it heaven, you can call it something, but it's some whence, and then it's also some when too, because there's time of some sort. It might be different than our time. It may be that they're not affected by our time, but if you don't have time, then you can't have a moment where God didn't do something and then a moment where God does do something, because that's a sequence of events. So, yeah, yeah. Okay. So, any other simple logic that you want me to go over? Because I wanted to cover the laws of logic and how they exist without the need of any god or mind at all. Just the true the reality itself is enough for logic to be. And now the true nature of reality, yeah, maybe we'll never know all there is to know about that, and goodness knows how much of it we do know. But we can know a few things without needing to know everything. Yeah, non-existence. Yeah, most gods are define themselves into non-existence because the apologist is trying to argue uh, using logic, which just it's so weird because, well, here's the funny thing about the laws of logic is our observation of reality is what we based those laws on, broadly speaking. And all the formal and informal fallacies that we developed are more codified, more nuanced rules therein, and those might be somewhat imperfectly worded due to natural language problems, so you could question some of them and try to iron them down and make them better and whatnot. And but ultimately, of course, we have the question that I have always posed, which is, okay, could it be that there's a argument that is valid and sound but cannot be verified outside of logic? And the only arguments that appear to work that way are completely abstract. They're A is B, B is C, C is D, A is D. Okay, there's nothing there other than the variables. But the moment that you begin talking about reality and you substitute those letters for other things, then you have a way to verify whether or not the damn premise is true in the first place. So, premise one, lobsters exist. Okay, well, sure, of course they do. Well, premise two. Oh, here we go. Now it's going to get stupid. Either lobsters exist or my light is not on right now. Okay, so, well, then that made it that my light has to be off because lobsters do exist. But there's a problem with the second premise in that there's no association causation between the lobsters and lights being on or off. So there's a fallacy. Okay. Well, how about a simple disjunctive syllogism? One that you can't have a fallacy. The light is on or off. It's off. So it's not on. Okay, great. Works. Perfectly valid and sound. Now, how do we know that it's not on? Well, we said it in the argument that it's off. So we're asserting that that's the truth. But we have an actual light, if we're talking about a real light, we can just go, hey, it's the damn light on or off. We don't even need the argument. We don't need the argument there at all. We can just go, yeah, the light's on. I see it. Yes, it's on. Or it's off. I don't see the light. Yes, it's working, you know. And so, how do you know when a fallacy occurs? Well, you either look at the mechanics of the argument and identify the fallacy, or you have to step outside of logic and look at reality itself. And how do we do that? Well, there doesn't appear to be that many systems that we know work. And apologists, theists seem to hate that. They call it scientism, they call it naturalism or evidentialism or whatever. It's like empirical methodology, repeatable testing, hypotheses, theories, some way that your idea can be disproven. If your idea can't be a way to falsify your idea has to be in place, and then you have to be able to test it, you know, and see if it's false. And boy, some theists have gotten really clever. Though, like, oh, well, if there's a God, then I'd expect for cats to always have cats and never to have a dog, because they don't understand evolution, right? So therefore, there's a God. I'm like, that's not really that's not really what we're talking about. It's more robust than that. So the methodology of discovering what's real, the epistemology that we use to discover whether something is true or not, you have to apply that to logic too. So logic is a subset of science. So does that mean we use science on everything? I think the answer is yes. And not everybody likes that answer. They go, oh, it's scientism. Like, I'm not saying that, no. I view scientism as the way it's defined. It's the statement that everything can be proved via science, or things can only be proven via science. I'm not willing to go that far yet, but I think that you'd be hard-pressed to find something that you couldn't use science on because it's such a broad field. So if you think you can come up with something that you can't use science on, let me know. Alright, that's all for now. I think that, the relationship between reality and logic. Logic is an observation of reality's behavior. Exactly. Logic maps onto reality. Otherwise, it'd be useless. Same thing with the laws of physics and such like that. That those are observations of how reality, at least our reality, functions, our universe functions. For now, at any rate, whether or not it obeyed the same laws of the past, who knows? Now, with the logic laws, most of them still apply no matter how physics work, but some of them go out the window, and you run into some big giant question marks. But that's a whole other ball of problems there. Alright. That's all for now. Okay, I think I covered all the logic for now. Unless you guys, girls and robots, have any more. I'll take one more question. One more question. Ask me something good. Ask me something impossible to answer. Come on. Bring it. This is an AMA. Before I hit the button. So, come on, somebody. Someone say some question. At the end of the question mark. Write a thing that has the question mark in the chat. Why? Lobsters. Can you prove wrong? No, you can never prove wrong. Are lobsters omni? Only the Lod is. Read the Lobsterist, all three of them. You'll know the answer. Okay, that was 3 questions. All right, thanks everybody. Come on. Post the comments and stuff. I figured out reality. Whee! Finn.